I see it all the time on Twitter and other places. Cops either getting beaten up by thugs or brutalizing criminals and even innocent people needlessly. Being someone who has my expertise, it's crazy to see for a couple of reasons. One being that the methods I see these officers using to restrain and detain people are usually absolutely awful. The other one being that even with these methods, a lot of these officers don't even appear to know how to apply them properly or safely. It makes you wonder what the deal is, considering that this is a job people claim to go into because they're passionate about it, and yet so many of them don't know anything about the most important part of the job, which is how to exert control over a person or situation. Cop combatives are almost always bullshito that only work on compliant opponents. Because of this and the mindset these cops are trained to have, they're liable to wrench your arm in a dangerous way or hit you in a way that could kill you. And not because you're truly resisting, but because you just aren't complying quickly enough. It can sometimes create a weird cycle where a cop puts someone in a painful position and the person starts panicking and struggling to alleviate the pressure. When the cop notices this, he almost starts acting in a sadistic way. Instead of simply ensuring that if the person listens, then they will not be harmed, the cop clamps down harder and starts acting ruthlessly. They might tell the suspect to stop resisting, but in a situation like that, it just sounds like they're saying, "Stop trying to keep me from breaking your arm." You see some really dark things said and done by these officers in predicaments like this. The God complex really comes out. These moves and mindsets come from a time far before what we now understand about fighting. These are relics of the past that begrudgingly exist today because decision makers who don't know better refuse to branch out and learn. Jocko Willink once described the method he was taught to pacify an uncooperative detainee in the military. If he struggles, just hit him with your rifle. If he doesn't stop, do it again and keep doing it until he stops. This was the line of thought from before legitimate forms of grappling were introduced into the military unarmed combat programs. The problem with this is that if someone really is that afraid, they won't just stop, and when they do, it's very likely only because they were gravely injured or killed. It's really strange to see how far behind the police are, considering that McMap and MacP are both over 20 years old, and how many police officers are former military. Many police forces in the US not only prioritize taking former military personnel, but the way these forces act is as though they're the annoying kid brother of the Marines. They're always ready to buy surplus gear and vehicles, and they love getting military training, but when it comes to unarmed combat, they cling heavily to their outdated tactical techniques. And of course, if someone was resisting, then many of these things wouldn't work, which is why many cops get whomped when someone tries to fight back. It's a Shu Xiaodong fight with some loser in a uniform getting beat up by some pants-sagging reject. Many police officers have zero legitimate hand-to-hand training, and they still have the gall to claim they can't do their job because they're afraid of backlash. While I can sympathize with that in a general sense, the real reason they can't do their job is because they don't know how to without brutalizing the suspect. If they actually knew how to fight with their hands, that anxiety would be cleared up quickly, because someone who knows how to fight knows how to do it with minimal risk to both parties, and also how to avoid it looking like they're trying to kill the suspect. Part of the problem is the way a lot of police officers tend to view the job they have, as well as the people they're meant to protect and serve. Everything with the police has to be internal. Everything has to be some sort of military-style, tactical operator, SWAT training. You can't just have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or wrestling. It has to be by cops, for cops, and they have to feel like the special forces while doing it. If you approach them as an outsider, they'll blow you off at best. I've spoken to officers about police brutality and suggested that their training should require them to take Jiu-Jitsu-based training, whether in the academy or after they hit the streets. Typically, they get defensive and sometimes even a little aggressive about it, saying things like, "If you don't like it, then why don't you become a cop and see how difficult it is?" Which is not the response someone gives if they actually want to fix a problem. Not to mention it's manipulative and dismissive. The officers I know who do jiu-jitsu, of which there are many, are a different breed from the majority of cops I've seen and met. They tend to be much more humble people on average, and they take their job seriously. The pride they take in their job leads them to wanting to do the best they can at it, and because of this, they soak up training like a sponge and are great to have around. The physical fitness that training of this nature helps them to achieve is invaluable on the street as a means of controlling not just suspects, but also themselves, in addition to helping them stay safer. You can go to a CrossFit gym or do distance running to improve some aspect of physical fitness, but it won't teach you to cope with the adrenaline or how to stay relaxed during a fight. Those options won't teach you to fight at all. I heard a comment from a cop who is also a longtime training partner and blue belt that was interesting to me because he mentioned a time where he was fighting with and then chasing a suspect. He said that during the chase he reached his fatigue point and that years before jiu-jitsu he probably would have just stopped and called for backup, which would have ended up leaving the suspect to escape. In this case though, he relaxed and started thinking about the best way to continue, which he realized was to just get in his car while his partner chased the suspect. He did so and he was able to cut the suspect off, which slowed him down enough to be captured. Any cop that I've ever met has had a story in which they point to grappling as the reason for them staying safe and catching the bad guy. Any of them who didn't had a story in which they admit that if they did train, they could have stayed safer or caught the bad guy. At the end of the day, nobody wants to be bad at their job and nobody wants to get hurt. So the question remains as to why so many departments train incorrectly and why so many cops are so slow to embrace modern forms of combat. Until they change their ways, they're going to run into the same problems. The beatings will continue until morale improves.